Sika Prabhu, who's going to speak
Yes.
on this channel.
Yes. Welcome, Rasasika Prabhu. Haribol. And welcome, dear devotees. So, okay, it's 8:01. Hare Krishna. Welcome, dear devotees, for joining on the ISKCON of New Jersey Towaco Zoom channel. It is our distinct pleasure to welcome again Her Grace Dhanya Gaurangi Devotee. And we're looking forward very much to this program. It's a topic that is very near and dear to all practicing devotees. This whole notion of devotee relationships, and I like the tagline, the practical magic. So we're very much looking forward to today's talk. Those of you who may not know, so Dhanya Gaurangi Devidasi is a second generation practitioner of Krishna consciousness. Her parents are both devotees. She was born and raised in Caracas, Venezuela, and has traveled the world preaching and sharing her music and kirtan. And many of them are her own original musical compositions, and as well as, of course, the beloved, she's been part of the beloved bhakti band, the Mayapuris. She's an initiated devotee, initiated by His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj. And she's the daughter of the Grammy Award-winning, world-famous artist Havi Prabhu. Now, Dhanya has received a master's degree in counselor education and her specialist degree in couples and family therapy. So she knows what she's talking about. Her therapeutic approach, creative spiritual wellness approach, aims to help individuals in relationships go deeper and thrive with the genuine spiritual principles at the core of the therapeutic practice. And in that sense, is a rare gem in our movement. So with that, I pass it on to Dhanya Devidasi to lead us this evening. Hare Krishna. Welcome.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Madam Gopal Prabhu, and also thanks to Yashoda Dalal Prabhu and Radhika Prabhu for encouraging me and asking me to come and speak on this platform. I feel honored. I spoke on this platform a couple of weeks back as part of the Women's Initiative, and so it's been so nice to share in this Sangha, and these classes are so valuable. It's really creating such a powerful current of spiritual vibration through the internet, which is just, it's miraculous. It's like a gold mine happening all throughout this crazy pandemic time. All these like jewels of classes and information and sharing is taking place on this platform. So I'm very honored and humbled to put my little grain of sand on that. Yeah, that being said, I want to first and foremost offer my humble obeisances to my Guru Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada and ask for their guidance and their permission to speak on the topic. And hopefully I'll be able to do something useful. And if not, it's an opportunity to develop the quality of humility. So it's a win-win. Anyways, so yeah, when I was asked to speak, I was kind of wondering what might be a good topic. And I think in general, devotee relationships, it's always a relevant conversation to be having. You know, as Madam Gopal Prabhu was saying, it relates to every practitioner. Srila Prabhupada highlights the difference between Bhajananandis and Gostianandis, and how Bhajananandis have the advantage, let's say, of being able to practice in isolation. And relatively speaking, a Gostianandi has to undergo certain austerity, and that austerity is to refine oneself through relationship. And actually, it's a really beautiful way of working on our qualities, because essentially in our relationships, the other person or the other parties, whoever they may be, whether it's a very quick, casual relationship, or if it's a very deep kind of lifelong relationship, like our family relationships or long-term service relationships, they serve as mirrors. And I think that this is an important concept. It's one that I use often in therapy. When I see clients, I offer this analogy of being able to see ourselves through the mirror of a relationship and allowing the other person to provide feedback. And in that way, we can kind of work on the things that are coming up for us that would only really come up in relationship. So I think that this relates very much to spiritual life, specifically, the verse that I usually turn to as kind of the bedrock of this conversation is in the Nectar of Instruction, the 4th verse, where it's being explained the 6 loving exchanges between devotees. And so essentially it's giving and receiving gifts or charity, exchanging prasad, and then revealing one's mind and inquiring in confidence. And I think that intellectually, let's say, or theoretically, we understand what that might be, which is, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? And it's important to note that our relationships in our spiritual life are notable for their quality and not necessarily their quantity. It's not that we have to develop these close, very intimate, personal relationships with each and every one that we meet. Although I would say that very advanced Vaishnavas do have that large capacity to impart deep, meaningful exchanges with everyone at every time. So to the extent that we do this with our smallest circle, we actually grow it. We actually grow our capacity to extend high level exchanges of devotional relationship. But that being said, I think that it's essential to try out really this concept of inquiring and revealing one's heart within very close, personal, safe relationships. So to kind of bring out a little bit of the information that I use clinically, I want to bring in the topic of vulnerability. So vulnerability essentially is our capacity to reveal ourselves without necessarily a guarantee of what that outcome is going to look like, right? And this could be quite scary to open up, specifically, let's say, about an issue that we're having or some anartha that's coming up, some unwanted quality or some bad habit, right? Srila Prabhupada describes it as both, either an unwanted quality or a bad habit that we're working on. Usually we run into some obstacle and we want to share with another devotee, let's say. The vulnerability that it takes to be transparent and to open up about whatever struggle we're going through, that's a very tender and very valuable expression of our devotional heart. And so it's important to be equipped to share, but it's also important to be equipped to receive. I'm sure that we've all had our experiences of revealing our mind to someone who was not equipped to receive, and also the experience of receiving when we ourselves were not equipped. And it puts quite a weird energy in the relationship. And so there's this one relationship researcher, her name is Brene Brown, and a lot of her research centers around shame and guilt. And vulnerability ended up coming up as a very important topic in her research. And she offers up an acronym, and the acronym is BRAVING. And I'll go through what that means. But essentially, she's saying these are the requirements that would be asked of us if we are to be a safe container for revealing our mind and receiving when someone is revealing in confidence. So the first one is boundaries. Right? So boundaries meaning what is and what is not okay. Being comfortable with expressing a limitation that we have. Being comfortable with creating a time and space that feels dedicated for a person without necessarily overextending, let's say. Saying something along the lines of, if a friend is coming to share an issue that they're going with, saying, I kind of have my hands full with my daughter, let's say, but I would love to dedicate time to listening to you. Would we be able to talk perhaps later tonight so that I can fully focus on what you want to share? So essentially what I'm creating is a boundary. I'm saying I cannot do this now, right? A kind but sincere no. And then a space and time when I actually can give you the attention and the space that you need in order to share. And so what I'm doing is essentially acknowledging, right? I'm creating a space. So boundaries can sometimes sound like a little bit harsh or a little bit structured, like I can't do this, I can't. It can sound a little limiting, let's say. But actually what you're doing with boundaries, if you can imagine it kind of like construction material, what you're doing is creating a space. naturally, when you create a space, there's going to be boundaries, there's going to be walls, there's going to be a roof, there's going to be foundation. So it's a good way of kind of visualizing what you're doing. Instead of saying, no, I can't talk right now, you're essentially saying, I would like to talk, and this is when I'm best able to listen, right? And that can really make the other person feel attended to. And we ourselves would probably really appreciate the opportunity to listen well. So that's an example of boundaries. There's many more. We could really do like a whole seminar just on boundaries. I think that it's an emerging area of conversation. I think that a lot of us could use a lot of help in the realm of boundaries. So, but I'll just leave it at that. It's just kind of a basic idea of what it is, which is creation of space and time by saying yes and no according to what we are and are not able to do. The next one that I wanted to bring up is reliability. And I think that this one is important. It's actually related to boundaries as well. Reliability is our capacity to do what we say we're going to do. And this is really important because what it is a reflection of my own self-awareness, right? It relates to boundaries because it's a way of not over-promising. And I think that this is important, especially when we care very deeply about our devotee friends and devotee family and the people that we want to share and be supportive of, is to not overpromise, to think and contemplate mindfully what I'm capable of, what I can actually offer by way of service, by way of listening, companionship, even understanding my own competencies in terms of like helping if someone's really struggling with something. Let's say they're struggling with depression or anxiety, or they're going through a very difficult time in a personal relationship, or they're really struggling spiritually. It would be really important for me to reflect at which point I can help them, and maybe at which point we would want to seek further help from a clinician, from a spiritual mentor or advisor. So essentially this idea of reliability is, I know what my competencies are. I know what my limitations are. And so it makes it easier for me to do what I say I'm going to do. So if I see that, a friend of mine is struggling to keep their house in shape because they've worked a lot and they just haven't had the time. If I truly have time to come over and say, I would love to help your house get cleaned up, we can do a kirtan when we're finished, I can dedicate 2 hours to this. Notice how the creation of space is there, right, with boundaries. And also I'm being mindful of what I can actually help you with. And then that means I show up, I really do give you 2 hours, I really do help you clean up the house, and then we really do a kirtan at the end. That basically kind of verifies me in terms of reliability. And the more often I do that, the better and more authentic it's going to feel in our relationships. So it's basically being a little careful to, maybe in excitement or enthusiasm or a desire to help, to not overpromise and to be a little accurate with what we say we're going to do, right? So the next one is accountability. And this is also very important. They're all kind of interrelated. One kind of floods into the other. So accountability, according to this researcher, has a lot to do with owning your mistakes, apologizing when we make mistakes, and making amends. And all three components are considered to be essential, right? One is to recognize when perhaps I've made an offense or I've done something wrong. And as we know, it's a really important and also a very tender topic in devotee relationships, because it's known as kind of the mad elephant, right? Which is to criticize devotees, to offend devotees. It's one that's known to trample our spiritual life. And it's so important, as we know from many pastimes and from the personal examples of our acharyas, that it's important to make amends and to apologize and to repair when we have erred, whether it was intentional or not. It's important to have the forgiveness of the Vaishnavas. The compassion of the Vaishnavas is considered to be the kalpavriksha, right? The wish-fulfilling tree. And an extension of compassion is forgiveness. So to receive the forgiveness of a Vaishnava is actually an incredible blessing for our spiritual life. And sometimes we won't be able to receive that forgiveness if we don't properly apologize and make amends. So we can see it actually as kind of a very quick avenue to our spiritual advancement. We're exposing ourselves in full, although it does feel quite vulnerable. We're exposing ourselves in full by asking for forgiveness, because what we get to receive is an extension of this devotee's compassion, and that can be very powerful and transformative for our spiritual life. So accountability would be that, owning your mistakes, apologizing for them, and then making amends. How can I make this better? What would be reparative? And this gives the other person an opportunity to share in confidence. Well, what would be helpful would be if this happened, or if this no longer happened, you know, that kind of thing. And then making a sincere effort from there. So an important one, certainly, and one that we can put into practice right away. The next one she describes as being the vault. And so, you know, a vault is sort of like a safe, like where you put your valuables. And she relates this to the idea of keeping things private. And I think that this is, whenever I talk about devotee relationships and the loving exchanges and, you know, revealing in confidence and inquiring, the in confidence part is always like very highlighted. And I think that it's important to note that, you know, the privacy element, the confidentiality element is going to be essential, especially in a community setting. If you feel that information that shouldn't be shared is shared, or if you feel that content that was specifically intended for one person then ends up getting kind of disseminated, it can really fracture trust in a way that is very difficult to repair. It's a very deep betrayal. You know, from a counseling standpoint, the more vulnerable you are in any given situation, the greater the damage that can be done, right? That's the definition of vulnerability, is that I'm going out on a limb and I'm not sure what the result is going to be. So a very intimate relationship, a very strong friendship, a very deep, loving relationship holds a safe space for vulnerability. I'm safe to be vulnerable. I know that I'll be cared for. I know that the other person has my best interest at heart, and I'm able to share in full, right? The opposite of that would be experiencing a betrayal. And there are a few betrayals that are more painful than feeling like your trust has been broken or your confidentiality has been compromised. There's not necessarily a negative intent associated with that. There's a term that we use sometimes in relationship therapy. It's called gossip bonding. And so it's the idea that I feel closer to other people when I share information that I've heard that sounds intimate, that sounds personal. But this is considered a very superficial, it's actually considered an artificial way of creating intimacy, right? I don't actually have a close relationship. I'm talking about someone else's close relationship, right? It's kind of extracting from one relationship and trying to deposit that into the intimacy bank of another relationship. But that's not how intimacy is built. Intimacy is built through actually maintaining someone's confidentiality. That's true, fulfilling, ultimately very like spiritually sound confidentiality and trust building, and that's really what we're looking for. So it's important to be aware, if maybe even if it's just to be close to somebody or to show that I'm close to somebody else, that perhaps I'm sharing information that doesn't belong to me, that perhaps I am sharing experiences that don't belong to me in an effort to be close to someone else. So it's not necessarily that there's any kind of malignant intent attached to that, but we do have to be very careful that when someone confides in us, that privacy is maintained as a safe space. So the next one, and it's kind of along the same lines, like I said, these all kind of like lead one into the other. The next one that I wanted to share is integrity. So, you know, there's a lot of ways that this has been described. I know that Vaisheshika Prabhu likes to say something along the lines of, it's what you're doing when you think no one else is looking. Right? It's how you behave when you think no one else is looking. And this researcher, she says, it's choosing courage over comfort. And she adds, it's practicing your values rather than professing them. And I think that these are two really powerful definitions to underscore. To choose courage over comfort means it may be easy to do certain things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. I would have to muster up strength perhaps to do the right thing, but I choose that over my personal comfort. And this is one of the ways in which close devotee relationships can really stretch us beyond our comfort zone. I would rather A, B, or C, but for the sake of the relationship, for the sake of what this person's needs are, and for my own personal benefit, ultimately, I want to stretch a little bit and try. And so, this obviously has to be balanced with the first element, which is boundaries. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But I did want to bring up integrity also because integrity is a reflection of our values. Our values are always going to be what informs not just our boundaries, but also our integrity and what we practice, practicing what we preach rather than simply preaching it or professing it. Meaning my behavior demonstrates what I believe in rather than what I'm constantly saying, and making sure that what I say and what I do match up, right? And so this has a little bit to do with reliability, which we talked about before, which is you do what you say you're going to do. So they're all a little bit related, as you guys can see. Integrity perhaps is a little bit deeper because it has to do with our spiritual values, right? Okay, so the next one is non-judgment. And this one, it can be a little bit subtle. And I do notice that part of the difficulty with non-judgment is not necessarily that we have anything against the other person that we're in a relationship with. It's that I actually can't hold the feeling of discomfort of witnessing someone else in pain. So this is a concept that can sometimes be, like I said, a little subtle. Let's say a friend is coming to me and they've lost a loved one and they're experiencing grief. So grief is a human experience that's universal. Anytime that there's change, there's grief. Anytime that there's a loss, there's grief. And so in that sense, we all have some experience of grief in some dimension, but it can be very painful, right? And so if a friend wants to process their grief with me, I might find myself having thoughts like, they should be able to get over this. They're not this body. Don't you know that this is just a result of their karma? And in an effort to maybe placate somebody, in an effort to perhaps give some spiritual literature or some wisdom, what I'm actually doing is I'm saying, I can't sit here and just be with you while you grieve. I need to put some distance between you and I. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some spiritual wisdom between you and I. I'm going to use the typical things that everybody says when they're having a hard time between you and I. I'm going to put niceties between you and I. It can be extremely painful and also extremely disarming when you sit with someone who's experiencing grief, for example. And so it may not necessarily be that you're judging them in the sense of criticizing somebody or having something against them. It could be that judgment comes up as a self-protective mechanism, meaning I don't feel comfortable to sit with what I'm hearing. So there must be something wrong with you because I'm not ready to deal with what's happening with me. So this is something that often comes up in counseling. It's a little bit of a nuanced experience, but I did want to bring it up just kind of as food for thought, right? If you've ever felt like maybe that's come up for you or you've experienced something similar. It is important to create a space kind of under the same umbrella of non-judgment of being able to ask for what we need. And this is not a guarantee necessarily that we're going to get it. It just means that we feel safe to ask. And then with another person who is interested in our well-being, we can kind of construct what's the best way to go about that, using the other tools that we've discussed so far. And this last one I really like. She talks a lot about generosity. And generosity, in the way that she explains it, is basically extending the most generous interpretation of the other person's behavior, actions, intentions. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you excuse things that may be hurtful. It means that in your interpretation of what's going on, you're very generous, right? Maybe I don't know what kind of day that person had. Maybe I don't know what kind of childhood that person had. maybe there's something that I'm doing that is triggering for them, and I'm totally unaware that I'm kind of touching a nerve. These are examples of being generous in our interpretation. This doesn't necessarily mean that we compromise on boundaries. This is actually for our own internal benefit. It benefits us to be generous because it keeps us out of a space of judgment. It keeps us out of a space of criticism. It prevents us from falling into sort of like spiritual relationship traps where we get all entangled and then our mind kind of takes over. So this concept of generosity, it's an extremely compassionate perspective. And I think that it harmonizes very well with the intention of Vaishnavas to be soft-hearted. To be soft-hearted means to see that, you know, as Bhakti Tirtha Swami so eloquently described, he says that all actions are an expression of love or a call for love. And this is something it's something very profound, actually, to see someone who maybe acts in a painful or hurtful way and understand that, you know, deep down that is definitely, especially on a spiritual platform, a cry for help. And again, I do want to kind of add the asterisk to this that this does not mean that you compromise boundaries. This does not mean that you tolerate abuse. This doesn't mean that we don't take action where we see injustice or where we see inequity or where there needs to be change. Actually, quite the opposite. It's basically saying, you know, I understand that there may be a problem and that problem may come from previous pain. And I can hold that and at the same time be able to create constructive solutions to the issues that I'm seeing. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be very generous in your interpretations and have really great boundaries. I would say even that great boundaries allow space for generous interpretations of people's actions and words. Okay, so I think that, you know, those are basically the general concepts that I like to use in my clinical work especially, and also what I aspire for in my personal relationships in order to really be able to hold space for vulnerability. And I had highlighted that previously as kind of the bedrock of really solid spiritual relationships. Vulnerability meaning I can come to you with what's really happening for me. And you have my genuine best interests at hand. You're putting these tools into use. And with that, we can kind of discuss in confidence and see in what way I can kind of anchor this in my spiritual life. You know, obviously in my clinical experience, I've seen how if this stays very surface and it's not anchored in spiritual values, what it becomes is kind of like a washing machine cycle where issues come up, they get superficially taken care of, they kind of go underground, they come up again, they get superficially taken care of, they go underground, and they kind of will take a different shape on the outside. But really what it is a lack of spiritual foundation, a lack of meaning making, a lack of kind of deeper, more meaningful values that need to be explored. And so I think that that's why in my work, I'm very passionate about making sure that people also explore this spiritual dimension, because it will literally affect all of your relationships, especially when you have a philosophy that's so profound, so informative, and so based in loving relationships, like our philosophy is. It harmonizes quite perfectly. So I think that that's it's the foundation of why I'm so interested in doing this work. One more thing that I wanted to touch on, which I think is an important concept. I actually get asked this. I was asked this right before this session, actually, if I could talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sometimes they get used like interchangeably. If a devotee is struggling with something, sometimes a sympathy or a sympathetic approach might not be effective, but then what is empathy? So essentially we kind of break it down in this way. Empathy is my ability to understand what you're going through and essentially to say, me too, I understand. I've been there before. I have felt what you feel. I see what you're feeling. And this doesn't mean I've been through the same experience, likely not, right? The range of human emotion and of human experience is so wide, and our experiences are so complex. It's likely that each person is having an extremely unique experience, but It's my ability to understand what you're going through and reflect that back to you. Right? I may not know exactly what you're going through, but I see that you're sad, and I've felt sadness in my own way before. So I'm here with you. I see that. It's a very close, if you can imagine what that kind of feels like to have somebody say that to you, it's actually like a very close experience. So just to contrast, sympathy is basically saying, not me, but I feel for you, right? That's the example that she gives. You're sad. Yeah, I'm not sad, but I'm sorry that you're feeling sad. Can you see how there's like kind of a power dynamic that takes place, which is sort of like a nicety. It's kind of what we were talking about before, which is I feel uncomfortable being that close to that emotion or to that experience. So I'm going to placate with, the niceties that people say, or I'm going to insert, a quote and not necessarily connect that to an empathic experience. It's a way of saying, I can see what's happening, but I need to keep a safe distance emotionally. And so that's essentially the difference between sympathy and empathy. Empathy means I'm here with you, even if I don't get it, even if it's not been my experience, even though it's painful to be in this with you, I'm here and I see it. And I value your experience. Your experience is real. That's what empathy is. And that actually breeds connection, whereas sympathy breeds a little bit of disconnection. There's a hierarchy, which means we're not really kind of on the same page. It's received very differently. And so it's important to note that. I hope that that's clear. Of course, we can talk about it more if it needs to be clarified, but it's something that I thought was pretty important. So, to kind of bring this into how it pertains to ISKCON specifically, I was kind of meditating on, okay, there's the micro of, my relationship with my spouse, my relationship with my kid, my relationship with my parents, my siblings, the people that I serve with. That's going to be kind of my immediate circle of impact. That's going to be where I, let's say, generate the greatest effect based on my ability to put these things into work or not. However, we also want to think in terms of our society, right? Because we're all members of a society that is continuing to grow, where there's many diverse experiences. We want to honor diversity. We want to acknowledge diversity. And that means diversity of psychology. That means diversity of culture. That means diversity of experience. And this is naturally going to create triggers, right? Because I am born and raised in a certain place, in a certain way. It's kind of, there's programming that goes along with this human machine that I was gifted for this particular birth. That programming is material, 100%. My mind is material, 100%, but it's the tools that we have to work with. And so it's important to refine the tools as much as possible, to have a handbook, to have rules around how I use this, right? We can acknowledge that the car is not the driver, but we still have to follow traffic laws. We still have to drive safely. We still have to understand how to maintain the car. We still want to understand the mechanics of it. And to the extent that you know how the car works and that you understand the reason behind traffic laws and that you understand the way that roads work and the way that other drivers work, this is going to make us better drivers, and it's going to get us to our destination. Right? And that's really the goal. The goal is Srimati Radharani's lotus feet. But how do we get there? I have the vehicle of this body that I have to work with. I have this programming that I have to work with. And so that being said, it is really important that we think about how this affects our society. In a lot of the research that's been done in terms of team building, relationship building in institutions and organizations, the research has kind of shown that whatever the leaders do by example is going to be the way that people within the organization end up kind of acting out as well. So this means that in organizations where leadership was transparent about how they communicate, made efforts to make deeper relationships in and out of the organization, took time and energy to demonstrate what it's like to ask for help and to be transparent about shortcomings or things that are still in construction, things that are still being worked on. To the extent that leaders were able to share that authentically, the people that were within the organization were able to replicate that. So in a sense, the leaders serve as models. And this sounds kind of like duh, of course, But really, I think that it's an important notion. It's a concept for ISKCON that could be really put to use, which is, how do leaders talk to one another? How do leaders problem solve? What is the nature of the leaders' personal relationships with one another and with the other people in their lives? And using that as a template for what works and what needs work. And I think that it's not in any way problematic. In fact, I think that it would be an excellent use, especially of social media, of the way that the internet allows for the quick and easy exchange of information. It can be the flow intergenerationally between first generation, second generation, newcomers, to see really the ins and outs, the processes of decision making, which are a reflection of relationships, the processes of goal setting, which are also a reflection of relationship. There's not an aspect of ISKCON that isn't a reflection of relationship in some way or form. From goal setting all the way to how we handle day-to-day conversations or administrative decisions. So it's important for there to be transparency and open communication, not just so that we know what's going on, but also so that we can replicate that, so that we can model after that and try that out for ourselves. So I did want to put that in there because it can be easy to kind of be stuck in the micro and not think about the macro, how this kind of influences how our society works as a whole. That being said, there's the grassroots way of doing it, which is, if I have relationships that are meaningful, full of integrity, where there's accountability, where there's healthy boundaries, there's good communication, there's space for confidential sharing, and I'm a vault, someone can trust me, I can be vulnerable and receive someone else's vulnerability. If I do that, and then my brothers and sisters do that, and my parents do that, and my kids do that, and my spouse does that, then whoever they contact experiences that as well. And then whoever they contact experiences that as well. And it's an extremely important and perhaps underrated way of creating massive change, is to live by our own values and really work hard at creating high level, very high quality personal relationships. It can have an incredible impact. And if we think about examples like His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami, or so many of the other exemplary people in our movement who have dedicated so much time and energy to, really elevating relationships, I think that it's a testament to what their impact can be long-term, even with people who have never met them. So I did want to bring that up as well. Speaking of Bhakti Tirtha Swami, we know his principles for community building, and one of the ones that I think is the most valuable relating to our current conversation is treating everyone as if the success of your spiritual life depends on the interaction that you're having with them. If we could really contemplate the magnitude of that statement, it would not only improve our relationships with other devotees, which is of course of prime importance, but it would actually improve our relationship with the people we preach to, with our coworkers, with the man I talked to behind the register at the gas station, with the people who help me at my checkout at the grocery store, with the nurse who takes my blood when I go for my yearly checkup. Even if it's a momentary experience, to treat it as if my spiritual life is really depending on these interactions, building one on top of the other. The accumulation of these interactions becomes a testament to me living my spiritual values. That's the idea. The idea is I'm living these principles, and it doesn't matter necessarily that the person is or is not, let's say, falling under a category of devotee or not. So when I say devotee relationships, I don't mean a relationship between devotees. I'm saying a devotee and whoever they relate to in the world, whether they're a part of this movement or they're not a part of this movement. It should be a testament to their spiritual strength and their wanting to live by these values. So I think that, it's been kind of a lot of information, and I would like to open the floor up to any questions. I would be really interested to hear what thoughts you all have, what questions you might have. Obviously, I'm sharing based on my limited experience. And so I'm always open to hearing feedback and anything additional. I don't know if there's anybody who kind of wants to take the lead. I don't know if I can unmute you or if you can unmute yourselves. I don't know how we want to do this.
I can also do. Yashodhara is also co-hosting. But Yashodullah Prabhu had a question or a comment.
Sure.
We can start with that.
Hey, well, Dhanya Gaurangi Devi, this was really helpful and lots of food for thought. I had a question. So not everyone is a trained psychotherapist or counselor like you are, but yet we want to do our bit as a friend or a confidant. So how does one help as a friend or a confidant, but avoid getting sucked into someone else's life,
Mhm.
or even like identifying with their life when they're going through major turmoil, like major relationship problems? Especially if we are not trained counselors, I feel sometimes we can end up doing more harm than good by giving
Sure.
well-meaning advice, which is incorrect.
Sure. I think that is such a fabulous point that you're making. I've certainly been there myself on the giving and the receiving end because I haven't always been a counselor. Maybe that's why I became a counselor. But yeah, certainly, I hear what you're saying. You're saying, yeah, how do you avoid getting sucked into drama, first of all? And then also, if you are going to be kind of sharing in some way, how do you avoid advice giving if you're not even really sure that what you're saying is necessarily accurate or applicable? And I think that there's a couple things to it. I think, as Vaishnavas, we're always trying to develop the quality of humility. There is nothing wrong with saying you've hit a limit in terms of your capacity to deal with something, capacity to understand what's happening, capacity to give appropriate advice. It's actually really healthy. And I think that, we talked about before, reliability means an awareness of your own competencies, saying, this is really not my strong suit. I'm here for you, right? Then I get to enter with empathy. I'm here for you. I see that you're struggling and my heart is with you. I want to accompany you through this process, but I'm feeling a limitation in my competency. This is not my strong suit. How can we together find somebody that you can talk to? How can we together find perhaps a mentor or a counselor or someone who is equipped to deal with this specific issue? And I'll be here with you while we do that, right? And so you get to do both, and you get to acknowledge your own boundary and still help the other person feel like you're truly there for them. And then in terms of kind of the advice, you can always offer up, well, I guess the rule of thumb is don't give advice unless you're asked to give advice, which is sometimes a tricky thing to do, right? Because you feel like, oh, I know what to. So yeah, to give advice when it's asked for, and you can be honest and say, I'm not sure that this is the right advice, but this is what my gut is saying, or this is what I understand from scripture, or this is what a mentor told me once, and this is what was helpful. So once you're asked for advice, to give it sincerely and you vulnerably sharing, right? It's a mutual exchange of vulnerability, saying this is what I think would be helpful, but you have to try it on and see if that feels right for you, and allowing the other person to be autonomous in whether that is applicable for them or not. So is that okay? Does that make sense?
Thank you. Very
Yeah,
helpful.
you. Great question.
Thank you. We have Bhakta Priya Mataji. Go ahead, Bhakta Priya.
My question is about, it may be like two questions, so this, but connected. Sometimes, like when you were explaining about braving, I notice that due to some past traumas, even from childhood, I wasn't able, for example, let's say, to put boundaries.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, man, trying to satisfy everyone by sacrificing my sadhana, by sacrificing, like, to serve devotees, so do everything for them, even sacrificing my own stuff. And only by therapy with one devotee, she explained me, she worked with me just on that I can set the boundaries.
Yeah.
And my point is that sometimes, due to some past psychological issues which we have and which not solved yet, we are unable to utilize this braving in our
Sure.
life. And the second question comes from that, what do you think about devotees asking for counseling from the mental health therapist, because like recently I got a message, personal message, asking me, how dare you are going to the mental health therapist, you're a devotee, you don't need it, you should be strong mentally and guide others, so stuff like that. So I was judged because I openly share with others that yes, I got the help and it helped me a lot in my devotional um, life. So what do you points on that, that should we as a devotees, why do we need, we are practicing the spiritual path?
Yeah, I think it's such a valuable point you're making, and I want to express my appreciation for you, offering that personal sharing that you yourself have been through therapy and that it's been helpful for you. I'm so happy that it was. I think that it's not just a devotee thing to have a stigma around receiving mental health services. I think that society-wide, even outside of the devotee circle, it's still very stigmatized. And I think that, there's just some fear around it and maybe misunderstandings around it. And I think that little by little that's changing. So do I think that people should reach out for mental health help? Yes, I do, of course, because, like I said before, even though the mind is subtle, it's still part of the material machine. And so it requires maintenance. And ideally, we would have a league of highly qualified, competent, available, affordable devotee mental health professionals. And until we do, we still need help. And so get the help, because we won't be able to be a healthy society if there's a part of our machine, even if it's the subtle part, which is the mind, that is kind of holding us back and dragging us down. So I would say, yes, seek services if you need services, especially if it's in an effort to move past an anartha, to move past a relationship difficulty that may be sort of creating an obstacle to your spiritual life. The example I give is, if you had a toothache, would you not go to a dentist even if he's not a devotee? Like, of course, because once you have a toothache, all you can think about is a toothache. You can't eat right, you can't sleep right, you can't talk properly, you're going to be in a grumpy mood, you're going to be affected in so many areas of your life, and that's a tooth. So
Yeah,
just go
you
to the
cannot
dentist, get the tooth taken care of, So in the same way,
on the toothache, yeah.
yeah. So in the same way, your mind is also a part of the machine. If there's something there that needs resolution, it's great if you can find a devotee counselor. And if you can't, find a counselor, just like it's great if you can find a devotee dentist. And if you can't, just find a dentist. So that would be my answer to that. I hope that that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great question, and thank you for the very practical answer. Because sometimes I also have this concern, especially because, well, there's this notion that those who are professional, say mental health counselors or psychotherapists who are trained in different schools of thought, that may conflict with our values as devotees. They don't understand our values. They may even encourage us to kind of gradually move away from our values, saying that, oh, all your four regular principles are just too stifling. That's really the cause of your problem. You just forget about them for a couple of years. So that's maybe a concern. So perhaps you can address some of that.
Yeah, I think that it's an important concern. I think that something people don't realize or remember about any service that you are receiving is that your responsibility is to be an informed consumer. That means that if I go to one doctor and I have doubts about my experience, I go and I get a second opinion or a third opinion or a fourth opinion. So their responsibility as a practitioner is to practice with integrity. My responsibility as a consumer is to be informed. So that means being informed about what therapy is supposed to be. And if you do even just like a really quick Google search about what therapy is supposed to be like, you'll find that therapy is really supposed to put the values and the meaning and the spiritual beliefs of the client, meaning the person receiving the service, in the center. It's not supposed to be about the psychiatrist or the psychologist or the mental health counselor or the social worker. It's supposed to be about the client. So if I know that going in, and I find myself in a therapeutic relationship where the therapist is maybe putting a lot of their beliefs on me, as an informed consumer, I need to get out of there because that's not what I'm looking for in therapy. I'm looking for someone who could put my beliefs and my values in the middle and help me work on my issues through that. So if I know that going in, then that allows me to be selective about the practitioner. And there, it's allowed. I don't know that people know this, but you're allowed to try on different therapists until you find one that really clicks for you.
Mm.
Just like you can do that with your general physician, just like you can do that with your dentist. I don't know if you guys are like just super faithful with your dentist. It's just like that one guy I went to and I'm going to go to him forever and he's my dentist for life. But usually you'll go according to what it felt like when you were there, and you're allowed to do that with a therapist as well. So certainly if you have a therapist who's challenging your beliefs and is making you question things about your spiritual foundation, I would definitely get a second opinion. I would definitely try and see a practitioner who really harmonized with my beliefs. And it would be ideal if we shared the same beliefs, but it's not a requirement necessarily.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. We have Shamal Kishori. Shamal Kishori has a question. Go ahead.
Haribol. Haribol,
Hey,
Dhanya.
Amala.
Thank you so much for this very enlivening discussion.
Oh,
I was really appreciating the section on non-judgmental interactions. Like growing up in ISKCON, I often felt that I had to hide certain things about just to avoid judgment, kind of hide maybe the flaws or not living up to certain ideals, right? And I'm wondering how we can balance having relationships where we can be open with where we are at spiritually, even when it means like just our struggles with sadhana or the material desires that we have, like having those kinds of friendships, where at the same time continuing to enliven each other so that we don't pull someone else down by talking about all of our stuff. You know what I mean? Like all of our struggles or the things that keep us engaged in this world.
Yeah, what a great question. And I think I resonate with that because I've also had the same question. And I think it's something that we're all kind of grappling with, right? Which is, how do I share honestly about where I'm at and still keep my aspirations clear, still keep the goal in mind, and maintain a mood of encouragement, you know? And I think that something that perhaps, I don't want to say that it's missing, but it's not as visible as maybe we'd all like for it to be, is sharing authentically about our struggles. Devotional service is not like for the faint of heart. It's a very all-encompassing and extremely high standard, what Prabhupada has given us. And I don't think that that's lost on any of us. I think that the natural counterpart is to be aware of and real about where we're struggling. I think that that's actually the real juice of a close spiritual relationship, is to talk authentically about what we're struggling with, because first and foremost, it's going to develop one of the most, if not the essential quality, which is humility. It's humbling to talk about the stuff that's hard for me. And it's actually humbling to hear when someone else is speaking authentically. I am sure you guys have all experienced at some point someone really revealing their mind about something that they're struggling with. And what it ends up happening is it has a humbling effect on you, because you realize, wow, someone is sharing so vulnerably. I've also felt that. That's the magic of empathy, is that two people can be connected in one experience. So I think that, you know, certainly it's difficult, but I think that it's worth it, if that makes sense. It's worth it to try. And this is kind of, you know, what this Brene Brown, what she talks about in terms of vulnerability. It's worth it to try for the sake of our relationships, for the sake of our society, for the sake of my sadhana improving. I need to talk to somebody about what's going on with my sadhana. For the sake of me developing my relationship with the holy name, I need to tell somebody that I'm not feeling it when I chant my japa, or that I'm struggling to connect with the deity, or that my relationships are feeling very heavy and I don't know how to get through a certain issue. It can only be to our benefit to share. My caveat with that would be to really work on a few very deep relationships rather than going wide or like making a Facebook post. I would say really developing deep personal relationships where day after day, month after month, year after year, I'm putting kind of coins in that account, if that makes sense, of trust, of care, of non-judgment, of being present, of really listening wholeheartedly and acknowledging when we make a mistake. You know, I heard you talk about your japa, and like for a second, I felt like really judgy and I just wanted to throw like a Gita verse at you. I'm sorry. Like I felt like in that moment, I really wasn't listening properly. That's me being accountable, right? That's me saying I could really be there for you better. Right? Or saying, you know, I've been faking it, like my 16 rounds have been on fire lately, and really, I haven't even been making 16. I'm not chanting right now, or, you know, whatever it is. And saying, you know, I apologize. I didn't feel safe to talk about this, but now I would like to. So I do think that there's a kind of give and take. It's a lot of vulnerability. It's an extremely tender process. And because of that, I think that it needs to be held as a very sacred and important space. I don't think that we should belittle it in any way when someone is willing to take that leap of faith and be real about what they're going through.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhanya. I think we have time for a couple more. There's someone has requested to ask anonymously, how would you handle this situation if we know a devotee has fallen off the track and is struggling with substance abuse right now, and also receptive for help and has kind of lost faith in Krishna consciousness? How would you go about helping?
Well, you know, one thing I would do is take some time to self-reflect about what kind of help I can offer and what my limitations might be, right? If I'm not a substance abuse counselor, that may be out of my depth to help in all the ways that I would like to. So maybe one of the ways would be to create a list of resources, right? A list of resources, counselor we can talk to, safe spaces where we can be without feeling triggered, safe people to talk to about my process. Now, you know, it sounds like this person may really trust you if they're able to open up about, you know, their substance abuse and their crisis of faith. I think that there is no way to underestimate what benefit could be given to someone by just simply being there and listening to them, just being an accepting, empathic presence, and you yourself being an example of firm faith and of steady sadhana. Not in such a way to show the other person how it's done, so to speak, but so that you generate that Shabda Brahman, right? That pure transcendental vibration through your behavior, through your chanting, through your life. That is purifying. We can't underestimate the power of the holy name. And I think that that's always present in our relationships. To the extent that I am firmly connected to Krishna, that's going to vibrate out. That doesn't just stay within the container of my relationship with Krishna, it vibrates out into all my relationships as well. So, you know, there's so much that can be said. I think that it's a very important question, but it's also quite broad. But what kind of comes off the top of my head is to be a good listener and be a good friend, and also know maybe where your limitations are and where you might want to reach out to a professional for help.
Thank you very much. We have Mitravinda followed by Apurva Prabhu. So Mitravinda, Mataji, if you can state your question or comment. Yeah, go
Hare
ahead.
Krishna, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking your time to share with us these things that you imbibe personally and professionally. I wanted to just add a little something to your statement about how to shop for, deal with, and interact with people who seek out and want to get healthier, or perhaps find other avenues of communication, and you know, that if they have fears or concerns that it would get out into the community, which is unfortunately a common thing, or that the the interaction would be impersonal or not as caring or empathetic. I wanted to add to it that there are rules of ethics that are sworn to by people in the mental health profession. And there are departments called the ethics departments that if there's also an issue that, you know, one could go to if they have concerns about what interactions they are supposed to have with their therapist. But on top of that, I wanted to say that I appreciate the aspects of sharing that you have that relate to community and relate to the beauty of this process. And I don't want to point fingers at ISKCON as though it's, you know, some, you know, strange thing in the corner. You know, I've spent 30 years trying to understand and practice and hold on to this process in my life. But I'd like to say also that, you know, with difficulties in my life that have come and gone, I have reached out to many devotees, and I guess in some way it was like the more that I didn't get a response of care and empathy, the more I reached out. So in terms of devotees seeking help and, you know, talking about their issues on a wider or broader platform than just in their community, which may be where the actual issues are deeply affecting them. If they go to leadership in the community and that leadership does not have a mood of compassion, empathy, or, you know, solution, then it turns into a bit of a quagmire that is unhealthy for the community. And it's a pity to watch devotees suffer in their own communities that they've raised children in, or, you know, whatever. It's difficult. And I think it's time to have those difficult conversations that lead to solutions. Because, you know, again, what you said was so, it was so exact that this path is a path of beauty. You know, Srimati Radharani is our goal. We're supposed to chase after her to learn how to serve Krishna. And her example is complete. It's not bias because of a degree or a car or a position. It's the integral part of each and every living being. It's our soul, our, you know, we're alive, we're living. That's what makes her know and love and want the best for us. So we have to start doing that for each other. And as a society, you know, we have to move forward in a way that exemplifies that. How can we ask people to come in? How can we ask people to come closer? And it shouldn't be just these people that can come in and get closer and be okay. And it's a great thing. And their path is smooth and everyone else's path is bumpy. That's a bias thing. And it has to be looked at and dealt with regardless of conditionings, upbringings, whatever. It has to be, well, what do each one of us need to do to get to that point of reflecting the beauty of this path in an authentic way? And thank you for quoting my Guru Maharaj's community guidelines. It's very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts and for your reflections. I think, you know, you're adding such a powerful point, which is to the extent that we each exemplify, you know, these values and try and, like you said, reflect the beauty of Srimati Radharani's compassion. To that extent, we are actually doing right by our acharyas. We are actually doing right by our society, by Srila Prabhupada. And so it's certainly the goal. And I would love to see that expand and grow and grow deep roots in our society.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I know Apurva Prabhu has been waiting for a while. So Apurva Prabhu, please go ahead. Or Mother Kamalini.
I just wanted to really acknowledge you for this wonderful talk. I came in a little late, but I'm going to watch it again and get really informed. But I was totally touched, moved, and inspired by everything you were saying. I'm just so amazed by how great a communicator you are in this whole field. And for the last 49 years that I've been in this movement, I've noticed that this is the essential ingredient that's been missing so much. It is the most, I feel, essential and important aspect of our 6 loving exchanges, to inquire confidentially and reveal one's mind. And I've seen so many devotees that have left the movement and have had so much difficulty, and who could have really been transformed by some of these essential points that you've made, which I'm just totally blown away by it. And I want to know what I can do, because this is really the need of the day. It is most crucial and timely for our society to go forward. I just want to do whatever I can to assist you and know what can we as Prabhupada disciples and maybe senior members of the society do to help you in this endeavor, which I think is just fantastic. It's so revolutionary, and it's so much the need of the day. So thank you so much, and please continue. But I wanted to know what you feel, how we can move forward with this on a global level and in our leadership, especially because it's the essential need of so many devotees that are in difficulty.
Yeah. Well, I want to start off by appreciating you, Prabhu, because I believe that you're soft-hearted Vaishnavaness personified. So I think that, so many of your natural qualities are already such excellent examples of this. And I want to express my appreciation, and obviously, the encouragement of our mentors. It's what moves us forward. So if anything I said resonated, then that means that my service tonight was definitely worth it. I think it's a big conversation. What perhaps, as you said, the first generation or the senior members of our movement can do. I think that there's a lot that can be done. I think that to admit that there's room for improvement in itself is such an improvement. To admit that there's work to be done, I think, is cultivating, like I said previously, such an important quality of humility that will benefit everybody. And it creates such a powerful example for generations to come to say, yeah, we can do better and we should be doing better. So I think that in that sense, you've already given such a beautiful example, and I'm very appreciative of that. I think that it puts one in a sort of awkward, like Vaishnav etiquette catch-22, to be junior and suggest something to the senior. So I want to, I think that for those of us who maybe work in this field or are in touch with the research or kind of like immersed in this literature, which is emerging everywhere. It's not like everybody in all other institutions knows this. This is very fresh, kind of cutting edge information that's coming up now. We're trying to see how we can overlap that with our spiritual values. I think that creating, like I said, powerful, deep relationships in our individual lives is certainly the starting point, so that it's a grassroots experience. And then in terms of, leadership and senior Vaishnavas, I think it's opening up conversation. It's allowing people seats at a table of different backgrounds, of different expertise, of different training with many different resources and life experiences that can all give their input of what they would need to feel cared for and where they see that in their particular community there may be a lack or a need or a deficiency, and where also in their community there are strengths and they can serve as an example. So basically making community voices heard, making community experiences visible, and talking sincerely about where there may be shortcomings, not in a mood of criticism. It's actually in a mood of construction, which is we want to do better. There's this crack in the pavement, we need to fill it. Or there's this, thing that we need to repair. Again, the example of the toothache. There's nothing wrong with saying you might have a tooth infection. Let's just get you to the dentist and get it taken care of. So I think, arming ourselves with tools and resources that support and harmonize with our spiritual values, I think that that's going to be important. And to the extent that our leaders are open and willing to use these tools and resources and hear the voices of people who are experienced and have, maybe different points of view. I think that that's going to be, worth it. That's my humble opinion. I don't necessarily consider myself an expert in terms of how this is going to play out in terms of leadership, but that's the idea that comes up.
Do you have any literature on your own that you're working on to distribute this information and bring it out widely to the communities besides the one you're in?
Well, I mean, I'm always interested in writing. I haven't necessarily developed that aspect of my work, but I would be interested to do so, especially because I've been asked a few times to do so. I think that there's a lot of really great literature out there right now that could kind of really be helpful right away. People who have specialized in so many areas that I wouldn't necessarily have the time or the resources to specialize in. Essentially, there's so much good stuff out there already. We can start working with that. And I would, of course, love to contribute if I can.
Great. And how can we be in communication with you?
You can find me on social media platforms, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with me. And of course, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to kind of pursue them further. That way, I'm always happy to reach out and help if it's possible.
Thank you so much for your talk today and your contribution to our society for caring for devotees. It's probably the most important work right now. I'm clear.
Thank you for your encouragement, Prabhu. I really appreciate it.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Apura Prabhu. I think you basically said what I just wanted to say, that this work is really very valuable and it's very much needed, because this whole thing that we're into, we signed up for inner work, and this is what it's about. If we can recognize what it is, then it'll make our societies so attractive to the whole world that this is the place to be. So we have to start from within and work outwards. Thank you. It's really great to hear these topics, and we look forward to hearing from you again. So I would like to request the devotees, please, I know it's late, but please hold on for another few seconds. I'm just going to announce some upcoming events, and then we can open up for saying a quick thank you to our guest. So if you're not aware, we have this wonderful Pathways to Perfection lecture series that's been ongoing on Saturdays. You can see every different topic of the 9 different processes is being covered by an excellent speaker. So the next one is Vishnu Smaranam by Radhadasi, and then going forward we have Padasevana, Marcham, etc. So every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. on this channel, tinyurl.com/Bhakti Center. So please make a note of that. And then we've had this seminar, Personal Finance Planning for Devotees by Vamshidhari Gopal Prabhu. This is a great speaker and really excellent topic on how you can learn to prepare for your retirement and maybe retire earlier, and how to plan out your life so you can be stress-free in terms of finances and focus on Krishna consciousness, how you can apply these principles and have plenty of Lakshmi left over for helping Krishna conscious causes. It's really a great seminar. If you've missed some of these, they're available on our YouTube page. But the next one is this coming Sunday. It's a Sunday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on this URL, tinyurl.com, ISKCON NJ seminar. If you're looking for these links, we also have them on our website, iskonofnewjersey.org. So you can just Google ISKCON of New Jersey, and you'll find it there. And on this particular channel, this Zoom channel, we also have our upcoming speakers. So on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we have His Holiness Jai Dvaita Swami Maharaj speaking on Canto 2. This is interactive sessions. On Thursday, we have Rasa Rasika Prabhu, who will be helping us go deeper into our japa. The topic is the japa zone. And then on Sunday, a special treat on the Gopi Gita. With our speaker Adi Gadadhar Prabhu, who has spoken on our channel several times. Very much look forward to that. So please be sure to join. And with that, I request His Grace Neelmani Prabhu, our president, to offer the first word of thanks, and then we'll open up to everyone else. Neelmani Prabhu, I hope he's around. Okay, and then everyone can unmute themselves. I'm just going to allow everyone to unmute yourself. So yeah, so I'll leave it open for another minute or so. Thank you, Dhanya, once again.
Thank you so much, wonderful.
Hare Krishna. Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Dhanya Devi. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhanya. That was wonderful.
Oh, hi, Hare Krishna.
I will.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Come
Krishna.
over here, she will be able to see you.
I'm on my, yeah. Thank you. Wonderful.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Dhanya.
Thank you.
You see it?
Okay, how do I get out of that?
Thank you, Dhanya.
Thank you. Thank you, Mataji.
So nice. So valuable.
Hare Krishna, Dhanya. It's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Very inspiring. Amazing.
Totally. The need of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhanya. Very nice topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you.
Haribo.
Well,
I love your laugh.
Thank you, Dhanya.
Laughter yoga here. Haribo. Prabhupada.